First contraction in 3 years. We saw the U.S. GDP actually shrink.
This initial GDP figure, it might just be the opening act. The main event might still be coming in terms of tariff impacts.
Okay, let's dive right in. Soft landing, or are we facing a bumpy ride into recession? That really is the economic head scratcher right now, isn't it?
It absolutely is.
You hear one thing, then like the complete opposite, and you're just left wondering what's really going on.
Exactly. It feels like we're trying to piece together a puzzle where, the pieces just don't seem to fit quite right.
Yeah, take this for instance. We saw the U.S. GDP actually shrink. Just a tiny bit, mind you, about 0.3% first quarter of the year. But still, first contraction in 3 years. That kind of news, well, it makes you sit up and pay attention.
It does. It definitely triggers those initial alarm bells. A shrinking economy is, a key thing to watch.
But here's where it gets a bit weird, or maybe just complex. Around the same time we're seeing this GDP dip, you've got organizations like the IMF maybe looking at the global picture slightly differently.
Right.
It just highlights that the overall economic outlook, especially globally, isn't always a simple yes or no answer. Exactly. Different data points, different groups, they can offer, varying perspectives on the very same underlying trends. It's not always straightforward.
And zooming out a bit, you look across the globe, and we're seeing some worrying signs there too. China, for example.
Yeah, it's significant.
Factory activity there. I mean, China's this huge engine for global growth, right? It took a serious hit. Worst contraction in almost 2 years.
Wow. And
their export orders really dropped off. That's a kind of headline that makes you think, okay, how interconnected is all this stuff?
Absolutely. And it's fascinating how these global shifts can ripple through, impacting demand, supply chains, potentially everywhere.
So let's bring it back home then, back to our own backyard and that little GDP blip. It turns out a big reason for that contraction wasn't necessarily that the whole economy just ground to a halt.
Right.
Instead, we saw this massive wave of imports. They shot up by something like 41%.
41%, that's huge. Yeah. Apparently, companies were scrambling to get stuff in before expected tariff hikes kicked in.
And that surge in imports, that's really key to understanding that specific GDP figure.
How so?
Well, remember, GDP includes net exports, the difference between what we sell abroad and what we buy from abroad. So if imports suddenly jump massively, it mathematically pulls the GDP number down, even if other parts of the economy, like consumer spending or business investment, are still, chugging along okay.
Right. So it's almost like this temporary flood of goods coming in just skewed the numbers for that quarter.
Sort of, yeah.
Like if you suddenly bought, a year's worth of toilet paper in 1 month, your bank balance looks awful that month, but it doesn't mean you stopped earning money necessarily.
That's actually a pretty good analogy. It shows how one specific event can create a kind of statistical distortion in the overall picture.
But, and this feels like a big but, some people argue that this frantic rush to import stuff might actually signal some deeper unease.
Unease about what, though?
Well, maybe about the economy's direction, or maybe about those very tariffs they were trying to beat. Our sources mentioned that economic uncertainty levels went up around then.
Okay.
And consumer confidence wasn't exactly hitting record highs either. So could it be that companies were stocking up because they were worried about what was coming? Hedging their bets?
That's a really important question. What was the motivation behind that import surge? Was it purely like a tactical move to avoid tariffs? Or does it reflect a deeper sense of economic insecurity?
Probably a bit of both.
It's likely a mix, yeah. It's hard to disentangle completely.
Okay, so here's where it gets, for me anyway, really interesting. GDP, as we know, it's kind of looking in the rearview mirror. It tells us what already happened.
Lagging indicator, exactly.
But the stock market, that's supposed to be looking out the windshield, right? Trying to guess what's going to happen next.
Forward-looking, yes.
Supposedly.
And, the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, they've both taken quite a tumble this year so far. That doesn't exactly scream smooth sailing ahead, does it? No, it certainly doesn't. And that disconnect between the backward-looking GDP data, with the import caveat, and the forward-looking market expectations, that's a huge source of the confusion right now.
So investors are maybe seeing clouds on the horizon.
It seems like investors are pricing in potential challenges, potential slowdowns that haven't fully shown up in the official economic history books like GDP yet.
So we've got this puzzle. past GDP number looks bad, but maybe for a specific, slightly weird reason involving imports.
Right.
Future-looking stock market looks nervous, maybe signaling trouble ahead.
Do that way.
China's factories are slowing down, adding to the global gloom. What does all this actually mean for you listening, for us? Are we heading for that soft landing everyone keeps hoping for, or is it, recession time?
Well, the sources we're looking at here, they don't exactly paint a clear picture of a soft landing based on this specific GDP data. It's more nuanced.
Okay.
But the concerns being raised, things like potential future dips in GDP, the possibility of stores having less stuff on the shelves because of maybe port backlogs or supply issues, and consumers potentially pulling back on spending if they feel less secure or if prices stay high. Those factors definitely point towards a scenario where the economy could slow down quite a bit more. Recession isn't off the table.
That image of, like, empty shelves or just fewer choices, that's something that hits home.
It does.
Because if you go to the store and can't find what you need, or if you're just feeling generally anxious about your job or the future, you're probably going to think twice about buying that new car or renovating the kitchen.
Exactly. And that's how a slowdown in one area, say, consumer confidence, can create these ripple effects throughout the entire economy. It feeds on itself sometimes.
And we haven't even really dug into the elephant in the room, those potential trade wars and the tariffs themselves.
Crucial point.
Our source material made this really important point, this first quarter GDP report, the one with the contraction. It reflects the economy before the full weight of those tariffs really landed.
Right. The timing matters.
So that next GDP report, the one covering the period after the tariffs are fully in effect, that could be the real eye-opener. That might tell us much more about the actual impact of these trade policies.
That is a critical thing to keep in mind. This initial GDP figure, it might just be the opening act. The main event might still be coming in terms of tariff impacts.
It really makes you think about this idea our source brought up, that trade is generally a positive-sum game, a win-win.
Usually, yes.
Yeah.
The theory goes that both sides benefit.
So when you start putting up walls, tariffs, barriers, it can often lead to, less stuff being available, and the stuff that is available costs more for consumers. It's kind of like trying to have a potluck dinner where everyone's only allowed to bring food made strictly in their own kitchen with only local ingredients.
Yeah.
The variety might suffer, and maybe the overall deliciousness factor goes down too.
That's actually a great way to visualize the potential drawbacks of more protectionist trade policies. Less choice, potentially higher costs.
So wrapping this up a bit, what's the takeaway for you, listening as you go about your day? We've seen this initial dip in GDP, yes, but it's really tangled up with this big import surge, which itself seems linked to those anticipated tariffs.
Right. The context is crucial.
So that means it might not be the clear, flashing red recession signal it first appeared to be. It's murkier than that.
That's right. You absolutely need that context. The import situation provides really important context for that specific GDP number. Don't read too much into it in isolation.
And there's always a but, isn't there? That doesn't mean we're, totally out of the woods.
Definitely not.
We're still seeing those clouds of uncertainty hovering around, like the slowdown in China's manufacturing we mentioned, and that kind of cautious, nervous outlook from the stock market.
All those signals suggest the economic picture is still pretty foggy, unclear.
These different indicators, they just remind us that the global economy is this incredibly complex, interconnected system. It's influenced by, a million different things happening all at once.
Policies, consumer behavior, global events, it all feeds in.
So as you're reading the news, or maybe getting ready for your next meeting, try to keep these different signals in mind. Don't just grab onto one headline.
Good advice.
Keep an eye out for those upcoming economic reports, especially that next GDP number. See if the picture starts to become any clearer. And maybe think a bit about how these big global trade dynamics and policy decisions can create such confusing, seemingly contradictory economic signals.
Staying informed and really considering a range of perspectives and data points, that's key to navigating this kind of uncertainty.
Absolutely. And here's maybe a final thought to chew on. In this world we live in, so interconnected, where policies can shift really fast, how do you make sense of it all? How do you interpret these conflicting economic signals to make informed decisions, whether it's for your household budget or your business? Is looking at just one data point, like GDP, ever really enough anymore? Or do we absolutely need to be looking at that whole global landscape, all the different pieces, to really understand what might be coming down the pike?